So if you're looking to play an opening with black, this opening might help you. So the game starts off with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to c4. Now, in the first four moves of the game, you can already shock your opponent by playing f5. Well, because this move weakens your king and it's a pretty unusual move to play as black. Well, in this position, he might just develop his knight as usual, and this is a mistake because you can just take his pawn on e4, threatening to take his knight. If he takes the knight, then you can play d5, forking his knight and the bishop, and in the first five moves of the game, you already are a piece up. Okay, so developing the knight was not a good idea. So what if he just takes your pawn? Well, you can just push on e4. Now in this position, he has two options. He can either go back with the knight, or he can play queen e2. Now let's say he plays queen e2, pins the pawn to the king, and you can just play queen e7, unpinning the pawn and threatening to take this knight once again. So now he is forced to go back. And once he goes back, you can just develop your knight because you're up in development. You have three pieces developed, and he only has two pieces developed on his side. He might try to take your pawn, but this is a big mistake. Now, this is a big mistake because you can just hop in your knight, attacking his queen, and also threatening a fork of king and the rook. So he might go back queen to d1, thinking that this fork is defended. But unfortunately for white, you sacrifice the knight on c2. If he takes, you take with the pawn, and this is a discovered check and a threat to the queen. Now nobody can save the queen. If he goes here, you can take, and there's no way to save the queen now. Now maybe queen e2 was not a good idea, so he just goes back, and you just develop. He tries to take your pawn, you threaten his bishop, and you have the center, you have the development, you're happy. So he saves his bishop, you go bishop to c5, let's say he takes, and you need to take with the knight here, and let's say now he brings out his knight, you castle, and he castles, you take the pawn here, and now you're just in a good position. Now, here is a juicy tactic in this position. Now let's say he just plays some normal looking move like knight to d2. You can sacrifice your knight, and if he takes with the rook, you take with the bishop, and he takes with the king. Now in this position, you have sacrificed your bishop and a knight, but that's not enough. You sacrifice another knight. Now if he takes, in this position, you can sacrifice another bishop to take his queen. Well, if you can't take this pawn and you cannot bring your knight out, well, what if I just go d3 defending this pawn? So if you take, I will take, and life will be easy again, right? Well, no, I will play bishop to c5, and if white plays knight to g5, threatening this fork right here, we have another juicy tactic, that is playing f4. Now if he goes here, you go queen to h4, and you can threaten a checkmate in this position. Now let's say in this position he just castles. Now we have a brilliant move in this position by playing knight f6. You don't care, you just sacrifice this rook, and once he takes the rook, this is a checkmate. And also this is like hanging like three different ways. Let's say he defends his checkmate by playing h3. So you just sacrifice the knight, you're threatening to take his queen. So if he goes queen d2, just trying to save his queen, you can just take the pawn on h3, giving him a discovered check and a double check from the knight and the bishop. Now he only has one move to go. I mean, both of these moves are kind of losing. Let's say he goes king h1. This is checkmate. So in this position, he has to take with the rook. So let's say he takes with the rook, you take the rook with the queen, and he goes to h1. Now, a queen and a bishop is not enough to checkmate the king, so you bring out your f3 pawn. And if he takes, there's this checkmate, but if he doesn't take, let's say he takes like this, pawn takes f3, then you can sacrifice a pawn on d5. Well, if he takes here or here, it doesn't matter. Okay? Because you can just bring out your bishop, and this is checkmate, and this is checkmate. Both of these are checkmates, and he cannot save both of them. Okay, so maybe pushing the pawn was not a good idea. So I cannot push the pawn, I cannot develop the knight, and I cannot take. So what can I do here? What can white in this position do? There has to be a best move, right? Well, there is a best move. He can play pawn to d4. Now after black takes, well, if white takes here on f5, then black can just play d5. Well, you can just threaten the bishop, develop the knight, or you can develop the bishop. You can even take this pawn someday. And when you castle, again, your rook will be on the f file. So that's also good. So what if he doesn't take here? What if he takes with a knight? Well, in this move, you just develop your knight to f6. And if he takes with a knight, it doesn't seem like a bad move, right? Well, d5. Now this is a fork, kind of, because if he takes with the pawn, you take with the bishop, he takes your knight, and you don't take the pawn, you take the queen, forcing him to take your queen, and you castle with check. And if he plays, let's say, bishop to d2, in this position, you can just threaten a fork on the king and the rook, takes, and just a simple move like king e2 is a blunder because of bishop to c5 that is threatening this pawn. Now he might just try to save this pawn by playing pawn to f3, but there's no king safety. You can just play rook to e8. If he goes back, you can give him a check by playing knight to e3. If he takes, then you can simply just win a full rook, and also this bishop is hanging.